My name is Craig Longmire. I have a story to tell you. I'll admit in advance it's going to be hard to swallow. The physical facts, however, are of public record. A simple request at the Hidden Valley Mountain Courthouse will verify that I'm not making them up. At least, not the part that police and forensic experts pieced together. It all began on August 23rd, 2011. The first anniversary of my separation from my first wife. Since then, I hadn't been doing well. So I knew that the day would be a difficult one for me. I decided it would be a good idea to get out of town for a bit and take my mind off things, go camping, fishing. I was familiar with some good spots near Hidden Valley Mountain, Georgia, a place I'd called home for 4 years. But on this occasion, I thought I'd try somewhere new. The Willow Park campgrounds. The drive would take me further into the wild than I was accustomed to, but the whole point was to get as far away as possible for the weekend. As soon as work ended, I hit the road, and as the miles melted behind me, I relaxed into the drive. I deliberately kept the radio off, not wanting any classic love songs to drag my thoughts backwards. The highway eventually turned into backcountry roads as I approached my destination. Already the distance and new sights were helping to clear my mind. The roads turned bumpier as I approached my destination. I was in deep country now. Houses and businesses started to spread out. At a certain point, however, I saw a sign for the Clayton Fair. Underneath that, I could read, "Support our football team." I figured that since I had to drive through Clayton on my way to the campgrounds, I could take a few minutes to visit the fair. I didn't mind doing my bit for the Clayton football team, though, truth be told, it was the lure of cotton candy that really motivated me. A memory of my wife flashed through my mind. She used to always tease me about my love of the stuff. As I pulled in, I noticed the fair was not a very big deal at all. I could make out some game booths and a corn dog stand. The rides were only for smaller children, except for the Ferris wheel. It was of a good height and well lit in the fading night sky. I parked the car in the dirt lot and headed toward the entry gate. A whiff of fried food greeted me. I'd hit the road directly after work without getting dinner. I was plenty hungry. A hot dog and some fries sounded great, with a cotton candy chaser, of course. The place wasn't jumping, but there were at least 30 screaming children on the rides, dashing between the game booths. My mouth watered when I saw the cotton candy stand. What the hell, I thought. Life is short. Start with dessert. I reached for my wallet and sauntered over. The stand was not very well lit. Even dimmer was the interior. I could just barely make out the blue and pink bags of cotton candy pinned to the back wall, and a sticky candy machine on the right. Someone sat in the dark recess. A woman. Her features were vague in the gloom. I could see, however, that she was wearing a large pair of black wraparound sunglasses, the kind you often see blind people wearing. "Cotton candy is bad for your teeth," she said, grinning, before I'd even placed my order. Her voice was without inflection, as if she were simply reading off the back of a cereal box. I thought I detected a slight movement of her head, as though she were looking me up and down. She had long and very frizzy black hair. Her uniform had definitely seen better days. Perhaps this explained the oversized black cable-knit sweater, the runlets poorly emphasizing the folds in her flesh, an attempt to cover up a shabby appearance. The woman turned to take one of the pink bags off the hook on the wall behind her. The sign above her said $5 per bag, so I took out a bill and held it out to her. Her head turned toward the money as if she didn't know where it was. Then she lifted a claw-like hand to take it. As I took the bag and turned to go, she spoke again, flatly. "Would you mind coming back here and helping me tie my shoelaces? It's much easier if someone else does it." And then she let out a sort of snort laugh, the first human emotion she displayed, perhaps to set me at ease, though it did the opposite. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I stuffed the bag into my jacket and zipped up a little so it wouldn't fall out. I walked around the caravan to its back entrance. There, a side door was open. A few stairs led up to where the woman stood in the dark. Looking up at her, I realized she was much larger than I had assumed. I crouched down in front of her. At the same instant, she leaned forward. I looked up into the lenses of those large black sunglasses. Our faces were but a few inches apart. I forced a smile and looked down at her black shoes, flat on the floor, with their shoelaces hanging sloppily on both sides. Swiftly, I tied up one lace and then the other. Something wasn't right with the feet, like they weren't made for shoes. All the while, I felt her unseen eyes boring into me and detected a foul odor hanging about her. I had the impression she was watching me with expectation, like a dog waiting for a treat. Finishing the task, and I leaned backward. I wanted to make a polite but speedy exit. It was at this point I could have sworn I heard this woman say something. I thought I heard her whisper, "You don't belong," in her exhale, very quietly. I suppose I wasn't 100% certain, but I had no reason to stay, so I stood up quickly and made a little jump backwards, stumbling on the steps. Moving around to the front of the food van, I rallied enough courage to thank her and walked away. "Just keep walking," I told myself. "Don't look back." But I couldn't resist. The woman had moved outside to the front of the food van now and was watching me. Without reason, I waved, and to my surprise, she waved back. I walked briskly back into the crowds, wanting nothing more than to put as much distance as possible between myself and that woman. I found a bench to land on and tore open the bag of cotton candy. Greedily, I jammed a tuft of the feathery sugar into my mouth. As it began to melt on my tongue, I realized I wasn't hungry anymore. I tossed the rest of the bag into a garbage drum by the bench. "Just keep driving," I told myself. I had some food in the car I could warm by the fire. Before I left, I made a pit stop at the restroom. I went in, surveyed the room, and concluded I was alone. 2 urinals against the wall were covered in black bags with signs on them, out of order. The taste of the cotton candy lingered on my tongue. It felt rough and dry in my mouth. I cupped my hands under the faucet to take a drink and stuck my tongue out at the mirror. Something wasn't right. My hair was messed up. It parted on the wrong side. A bit more water, and I washed my face and hair until I felt right again, until I looked right again. I stepped into a stall, and the door clicked behind me. After flushing, I turned the latch on the door to leave. The latch turned, but the door wouldn't open. I pulled harder and again, harder, but it wouldn't budge. I looked in the crack, and I could see that the lock was retracting. What was going on? The space between the bottom of the stall door and the floor was far too narrow for me to fit under. What a lucky day this was turning out to be. "Is anyone there?" I shouted. "Hello?" Silence. Too much silence. The oddity hit me in the gut. What had happened to the sounds of the fair? Where were the voices, the happy screams of the children? It was almost as if my exasperated call for help had silenced everything. Feeling a little claustrophobic, I tried the door again, but more forcefully, this time kicking as well as pushing it. "Hello?" I called. Nothing but the echo of my own voice came back to me. I lowered the toilet seat and climbed on top of it. I planned to hoist myself over the top of the stall. As soon as I grabbed the top of the stall walls, the lights went out. The only visible parts of the restroom then were thanks to a thin line of light from the setting sun coming in from a high window where I had entered. One more time, I called for help. "Hey, anybody? What's happening?" Nothing but silence again. In that silence, I became aware of my own washy, heavy breathing. It calmed me to listen to myself inhale and exhale as if this bit of normalcy could overcome the surreal nature of my evening. I had started to make out another sound in that restroom. It was the sound of another person's breathing, right behind the stall door. My own breathing was being echoed by someone else. I held my breath and listened. There it was again. Someone was breathing deeply, slowly, right outside the stall. I kicked the stall door and screamed, "Let me out of here!" I took a step back as far as I could. Then I heard it again. A heavy, rasping voice whisper, "You don't belong. But you've come at a good time." The voice was undeniable this time. I lost my breath for a few seconds, and suddenly the lights came back on, brighter than before. I was at first blinded, but as my eyes became more adjusted, I saw that the stall door was slightly ajar. I stared at it in utter disbelief and then threw it open, stepping boldly into the wider bathroom. No one was there. Upon leaving the restroom, I realized that the sun had gone down completely, and the fair, where was everyone? The rides weren't moving anymore. The children were gone. The only sign of life was the man in the ticket booth, packing up his things for the night. I reluctantly glanced at the blind woman's food truck. It was gone. Nothing but a patch of dirt occupied the place where it had been. My few minutes in the restroom felt like an hour. I took off toward my car, one of only 3 left in the dirt lot. I started my car and gunned the engine as I pulled out of the lot and back onto the highway. I took in some deep breaths and grabbed what was left of some water in my seat's console. It was warm, but I didn't care. My mouth had again become painfully dry. For a second, I thought about ending my weekend getaway and just going home. Home. The thought of an empty house without my wife there to greet me, that's what kept me on the road toward Willow Park campgrounds. What I needed now was to set up my tent in the green woods and breathe in the fresh air under the stars. When I eventually arrived at Willow Park campgrounds, I was grateful to see the 2 attendants who greeted me. Blake and Donald, their name tags read. 2 older gentlemen wearing brown park ranger uniforms. Donald was reading the paper when I came in. He immediately put it down to welcome me. The first thing I noticed about Donald was that he had awful teeth, yet his smile was warm. Blake offered me some coffee and pointed out a rack of brochures for tourists in case I wanted to do some sightseeing. We exchanged a few words about the weather and the fish I could expect to reel in. The 2 of them had no idea how much relief I was getting from this ordinary conversation. While Blake was looking at my reservation, Donald went back to his paper. He leaned forward, rapt by something he was reading. "Anything interesting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He looked up, but Blake spoke for him. "Haven't you heard what's been going on around here?" I shook my head. 4 murders in the past month," Donald said, hiding his teeth behind pressed lips. "Just down the road." I swallowed. "Where to?" "Clayton." I told Donald I'd just come from there, that I'd stopped at the fair. Blake changed the subject a little too abruptly. "Not too many people camping around this time. You should have the whole park to yourself for the next couple of nights." He handed me a sticker from my car. "Don't let Donald scare you. Sleep with your gun under your pillow and you'll be right as rain." He winked, raising his coffee to his lips. I forced a smile. There was no moon that night. I drove slowly down a dirt road to my campsite, pulled into my spot, set up camp, and got a good fire going. I cooked some baked beans and retired to my tent. Sleep came slowly as the anxiety of the day's events lingered. At a certain point, I woke up and checked my phone to see how long I'd been out. Only an hour. To make matters worse, in that brief period of sleep, I dreamed I was back at the Clayton Fairgrounds, standing once more in front of the cotton candy food truck. Even in my dream, I could smell the stench of the woman who'd stood there, her black glasses fixed on me like the eyes of a large insect. The sounds of the forest around me began to raise all kinds of ideas in my mind. I had to relax. I picked up my phone and discovered to my surprise that the signal was very strong. I decided to watch a few episodes of MASH, a show my father and I used to watch when I was growing up. I started scrolling through the videos on my phone. Almost immediately, the blood in my veins turned to ice. Just outside my tent, someone or something else had let out a long breath. Nothing but a thin layer of fabric separated me from whoever or whatever was out there. I powered down my phone and lay very still. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the dark. I crawled silently toward the open flap of the tent. I stuck my head out slowly and looked around. The only light came from glowing embers in the fire pit. By that light, I could see that the camp space around me was empty, nor was there any movement in the bushes beyond. I lowered myself to the ground, lying half in and half out of the tent. For a long time, anticipation kept me awake, but eventually, weariness won out. The next thing I remember is waking up under the morning sun. I looked around cautiously and then rose and walked around my tent, finding no sign of anyone or anything having been there the night before. I rubbed my eyes and became aware of a pounding headache. Part of me wanted to go home, but the other half of me was chasing the experience I had come here to have. I decided I'd leave that evening. I would spend the day doing what I had come for, fishing, hiking, relaxing. I grabbed my tackle and headed toward the lake. The fishing turned out to be great, just as Blake and Donald had predicted. I put 3 brown trout on the grill for lunch. For an hour or two, I forgot the strangeness of the day before. I felt my mind slide back into a safe place. Reaching into my jacket pocket, I pulled out a cigar and leaned over the fire to light it. As I did this, something caught my eye. Not far away, something large and black was moving through the trees. I froze in place. After a few minutes, not seeing anything more, I stood up to get a better look. Whatever I'd seen was gone. A bear, maybe? I shook my head. Great, I thought. On top of everything, I was having a run-in with Bigfoot. This was the final straw that sent me packing. I would go home. My tent was already in the trunk. As softly as I could, I threw my cooking supplies and deck chair into the back of my car and hopped into the driver's seat, locking the car door in the same fluid motion. In the safety of the locked vehicle, overcoming that itching feeling of fear, I started the car and drove away from the campsite. I should have kept right on going all the way back to Hidden Valley Mountain, but I thought it a courtesy to tell Blake and Donald what I'd seen. They were responsible for the campers in this park and would surely want to know of any unusual wildlife activity, especially a bear. The bell on the screen door announced my arrival. Donald was there alone, in the same position but with a different newspaper. He looked at me over the top of it. "Good morning, sir. Did you have a good night?" "Yeah, I did. Hey, look, I'm sorry, but I won't be staying the full weekend." I didn't want to sound dramatic, but I had to let him know what I had seen. "You know, this morning I could have sworn I saw a black bear moving through the forest." "Black bear?" Donald laughed, sitting up and laying the paper down on the desk. "Sir, there hasn't been a single bear around these parts since I've worked here, and I've worked here for 12 years. I saw it moving through the forest. It was close, and it was big." "We only have deer here, sir," Donald assured me. "Look, I'll be leaving now. Please have someone thoroughly check your campground. I know what I saw." I'd broken out into a light jog as I approached my car, got in, and locked the doors. "You don't belong, but you've come at a good time." I could not get that voice out of my head. I put my car in reverse to get out of my space, and then, with no little force, threw it into drive. But no, something was wrong. The car leaned to one side and resisted the acceleration. I got out and walked to the front of the car, taking in the sight of the right front tire flat on the ground. I bent down to look more closely at the tire and saw something protruding from it. Prying the item out, I discovered that it was something long, sharp, and tooth-like. But there was more. It was bloody. A bloody canine. The day before, I might have just thrown the tooth on the ground and walked away in exasperation, but I was in a different place emotionally today. I stood up and jogged back into the camp office, throwing the bloody canine down on the front desk. "What the hell is this?" I asked Donald. Donald peered over his newspaper at the tooth. With one hand, he reached out and inspected it. He leaned forward and rose from his seat. "A tooth," he observed, looking like he was putting two and two together. "A bear tooth, from the looks of it. It was stuck in my tire. So much for his 12 years at the campground." Outside, rain began to fall. "Donald, look, I don't know what's going on here. Yesterday when I stopped at the fair in Clayton, something happened. I think someone was playing a prank on me, but not a funny one. Then, in the middle of the night, I felt... Hell, I know this sounds crazy, but it was like I could feel someone outside my tent watching me. And then this morning with the bear, something isn't right." Donald wasn't really listening to me. He seemed to be contemplating something else, something about the bear tooth in his hand. He grabbed his cell phone and dialed quickly. "You better get down here, Jeff. Something strange is going on. One of our campers just found a bloody bear tooth in his car tire." "Yep, you heard right." Donald looked at me with apologetic eyes. A few seconds later, he stood up and locked the back door. He then made his way forward and locked the front door, too. Things were happening too fast. I was happy to finally have told someone about my experiences in the last day, but Donald's actions, quite frankly, were concerning me more than anything I'd experienced so far. "What's going on?" I asked. "Sir, Crane, is it?" "Yes." "Crane, these killings in Clayton. Each victim had his or her teeth removed and replaced with the teeth of an adult bear. It's a bit ironic, you see. It reminds me a lot of the folklore around here, what the townsfolk call the woman who rearranges people. According to the myth, it wasn't just teeth, it was hair and body parts." Donald closed his mouth and looked down as if ashamed of his own dental hygiene. "That's what creeps me out. It was the fourth murder when they found it. Something weird, like the body had been rearranged. A mirror image, they called it. A mole that had been on the person's left cheek was sitting quite plainly on the right. They looked at photos to confirm it. They exhumed the bodies of the first 3 victims to compare, but the bodies were no longer in the graves. Just holes in the ground from under the coffins. The bodies had been sucked out. Quite a cave system we have in these parts. The cops are saying it's a serial killer. My friend Jeff, he's on the case. He'll be here soon." Donald was right. Within 10 minutes, the sound of a siren announced the arrival of a patrol car, moving swiftly through the park's entrance and into the parking lot. I breathed a sigh of relief and heard Donald do the same. A few seconds passed as we waited for the policeman to come through the screen door. "Jeff?" Donald called out. Nothing. What was weird to me was not just that Jeff hadn't come in through the door, but that we'd heard no sound of anyone outside the building since the police siren was turned off. Surely he wasn't just sitting in his car. If there was a problem, wouldn't he have called Donald back? Donald took up his phone again and quickly dialed another number. His personal phone, he explained to me. We waited. And then we heard it. The sound of a phone ringing out there in Jeff's patrol car. Donald and I locked eyes. "Screw this," Donald said. He pulled a double-barreled shotgun from under the counter and moved toward the front door. I took a step back, making way for him, surprised at the suddenness of his action. He opened the door and made as if to step out, but then jumped backward. Something had been tossed at his feet. It looked like a huge black bear skin. The head was facing us, its jaws wide open. I cautiously moved closer. The skin was no taxidermy job. It was, in fact, no skin at all, but rather a very realistic costume. Donald stepped into the doorway, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "What the hell?" he yelled, gripping his shotgun, ready to fire. His lips did not move a second time, but I heard that same statement repeated from outside with the same inflections and tone. Donald must have been stunned by the echo of his own voice because he slowly lowered the shotgun. The bang from outside shook the walls of the park office and blasted Donald backward towards the counter. His arms were flung wide and blood poured out of his chest in a way I'd never seen anyone bleed before. His hold on the shotgun loosened and the weapon hit the floor, I ran to the door, slammed it shut, and slid the bolt lock into place. I rushed to Donald's side, my hands shaking fiercely. I didn't know what to do. There was no way to stop the bleeding from the gaping hole in his chest. I understood that he would be dead in a matter of seconds. I held his hand, and he looked at me until he didn't. I picked up the weapon. I moved towards the window, avoiding the pool of blood that had spread out around Donald's body. I did not look at his face with its fixed stare. It was then that it hit me. Instead of the smell of blood, I recognized the foul odor of that woman at the fairgrounds. I fumbled around for the phone on the desk and frantically dialed 911. But the line was dead. My phone was in the cup holder in my car. There was no way I was going for it. I made it to the window of the office, terrified of what I would see outside. I tried to silence my breathing by closing my mouth, but that meant breathing through my nose and inhaling. God, I could smell that wretched woman's scent. Was it her? Was she doing this? I looked out into the small lot and saw my car, the police car, and a third, most likely Donald's. Swallowing, I moved my head to look towards the front step where the bear costume had been. It was gone. I didn't take the time to process what this meant. I opened the front door and sprinted, letting out a cry that anticipated being shot. I reached the police car. The door was open. Jeff, though, was sitting in the driver's seat, blood everywhere. Crouching, I took hold of him, dragging him to the ground. I slid into his place in the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition. I shut the door, locked it, and started the car. I couldn't believe my good fortune. I reversed hard and braked when I noticed a figure in my rearview mirror. The cotton candy woman. There she was, behind the vehicle, in her tattered uniform and black sweater, wet from the rain. She looked like she was in a trance. She swayed, her head raised as though she were tasting the air. That smell. Somehow it managed to seep into the closed windows of the police car, even with the rain pouring outside. With extraordinary strength, she threw something onto the trunk of the car. The bearskin costume. I didn't so much hear it hit the car as I felt it. She opened her mouth and started to howl. She was screaming something at me. I didn't stop to engage her. I floored it out of there, not taking my foot off the accelerator until I reached the highway. This all happened 22 years ago. Eventually, the grisly scene at the park office was visited by police and forensic experts. I was a suspect at first, but then exonerated by the evidence. The woman, however, was never identified or caught. The weapon that had killed Donald was never found either. The crime remains unsolved to this day, along with the other murders in Clayton. Interestingly enough, the macabre killings ceased after the incident at the park office. The community could rest easy again to some degree. I couldn't say the same for myself. For my part, I couldn't live in Georgia anymore, not after all of this. I moved to Florida and eventually married again and started a family. But I'll have you know that I never take my children camping. We never go to amusement parks. And I have completely lost my taste for cotton candy. No matter how much distance I have tried to insert between myself and the events I've related here, I still live Under the shadow of the words, I heard the dark-eyed woman scream at me as I sped out of the campground. If I close my eyes, I can still see her in my rearview mirror, her arms outstretched and her neck taut as she hurled her final words at me. You don't belong here.